Hello, I'm Lucy Gray. The Israeli military says its forces have advanced deep into the Gaza Strip. The IDF said a joint action of ground, sea and air forces had seen troops break through Hamas front lines of defence in the north of the Gaza Strip, and Israel forces were at the gates of Gaza City. The Palestinian Red Crescent says overnight loud explosions and shelling could be heard in the city, including close to Al-Quds hospital. Meanwhile, more people are hoping to leave Gaza today following international efforts to open the Rafah crossing to Egypt. Gaza border officials said the crossing would continue to operate. Some 7,500 foreign passport holders would be able to leave Gaza over about 2 weeks. Palestinians who've been wounded are also expected to be taken to Egypt, where they'll be treated in a new field hospital. Our Middle East correspondent Yolande Knell has our first report, which contains material you may find upsetting.
Gazans call it their gateway to the world. Finally, yesterday, the Rafah crossing opened. For the first time in more than 3 weeks, some foreign citizens were allowed to leave the war zone for Egypt, including some Britons, though details weren't given. But many others are still waiting.
So this is the third time to come to the border and nothing happened. As they told, your name is not there. So I have to go back to the school, to the shelter, waiting for the bombing.
At the other end of the Gaza Strip, in Jabalia, more Israeli strikes. Hamas says nearly 200 people were killed here in 2 days. And across the region, the humanitarian crisis deepens. The head of the biggest UN agency in Gaza entered to see for himself.
I was shocked by the fact that everyone there was asking for food, was asking for water. I saw almost every children trying to express their way that they need to eat, they need to have water.
But the war continues relentlessly, 24/7. It's almost 4 weeks since Hamas gunmen stormed the border and killed 1,400 Israelis. Hamas is designated as a terrorist organisation by the UK government. Here, the Israeli army shows what it says are the weapons used against its citizens in the 7th of October attacks.
Pull out the safety, throw this into a room, close the door, shut, and it takes the temperature inside the room to 3,000 degrees during the explosion. It burns, incinerates everything inside the room, nothing comes out.
Sirens warning of incoming rockets interrupted the event near Tel Aviv. When Hamas launched its attack, a retired Israeli general, Noam Tibon, drove down from Tel Aviv to rescue his son's family. Using a rifle from a dead Israeli soldier, he fought his way towards their home.
This is the biggest failure in the history of the State of Israel. It was a military failure. It was an intelligence failure, and it was the failure of the government.
With both sides now preparing for a long, difficult war in Gaza, those who are making it out of Rafah are the lucky few. Most are left to face the fighting, feeling nowhere is safe. Yolande Knell, BBC News, Jerusalem.
Well, let's speak now to Anna Foster, our correspondent who's in southern Israel, and the airstrikes continue. And particularly, let's talk about Jabalia, the refugee camp that we were hearing in Yolande's piece there, that there have been more strikes there. And the UN Human Rights Agency talking about how this could amount to war crimes.
So we had confirmation late yesterday that there had been another Israeli strike on Jabalia, and we'd seen 2 the day before, one on the refugee camp area, which is a lot of people packed into a very small space, and one on the town. Now, Israel say that they, in those 3 separate airstrikes, that they destroyed Hamas command and control infrastructure. They say that they killed at least 1 senior Hamas commander and various Hamas cells. The problem is, of course, that they are working in these built-up civilian neighbourhoods. Now, the Israel Defence Forces told people living in Gaza to move south, particularly in the north of Gaza, because they said that would be the focus of their operations, that would be the battlefield. But for many people, they weren't able to move south, and for those who did and found themselves displaced with no homes, living in tents, sheltering where they could in the streets, no food, no water in this desperate humanitarian situation, we know that many people chose to go back to the north again. And there have been questions raised about whether or not Israel should be targeting these civilian areas. Now, Israel says that Hamas are using those civilians as human shields, and therefore, in order to try and eradicate Hamas from Gaza, which is their stated aim after those attacks on October the 7th, they need to focus on the command and control centres, the places where Hamas infrastructure is, both on the ground and buried underneath it. But the problem is, when you think of the size of Gaza, how small it is, a lot of that is wrapped into civilian areas, and that is why we are seeing, after these strikes, these numerous civilian casualties, often as well of women and children.
And President Biden has now said that there has to be a pause in fighting to facilitate the release of hostages at least. But Israel's still pushing back on any idea of pausing things, isn't it?
Yeah, Israel are very clear that this is an existential fight for the security and the existence of the Israeli nation. They have been pointing to other countries around the world, and they say when there have been similar barbaric attacks on their soil, then these countries push back. The problem is with Gaza, as we've been reflecting, is that it is, as we were saying, a very small place with a very dense civilian population. It's not a place that people can choose to leave. If you think of war zones in other parts of the world, often the civilian population, when war breaks out, have the opportunity to leave. But of course, in Gaza, access in and out is controlled by Israel. So the more than 2 million people who live there, they can't actually leave Gaza at all. The best that they can do is move to another part of the Strip away from the fighting. And you were talking there about the Rafah crossing, Yoland's report. We saw some people starting to leave, foreign passport holders, some people with dual nationalities. But as Yoland was reflecting there, that is really only a very, very tiny fraction of the number of people who are stuck inside Gaza during this ongoing, at times constant bombardment.
Thanks very much, Anna Foster, for us there in southern Israel. Let's go live now to Amman, and we can speak to Toby Fricker, spokesperson for UNICEF. I suppose that is the one positive that's happened yesterday, was this 400 people able to leave Gaza, and among that some injured people, and this setting up of a field hospital in Egypt. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's very hard to find positives, obviously, at the moment. But I think UNICEF welcomes the opening of the border, particularly for urgent medical cases and especially for children. We welcome that. We've been supporting the government of Egypt, providing some medical supplies for that field hospital close to the Rafah border crossing. But what we really need to see is obviously a stop to the killing of children and the maiming of children, which continues to go on. And we've seen the carnage recently in Jabalia. And that's really our number one goal, really, is to keep pushing for that immediate humanitarian ceasefire, as the UN Secretary General said. UNICEF has said numerous times, and we keep saying that day in, day out, because the new normal is really horrific right now.
Can you tell us how and who is deciding who gets to leave? Who is it that's going in and deciding which injured people are being able to be taken to this field hospital in Egypt?
Well, it's very difficult for me to provide, specifics on who's coming in, coming out. But I think the number one thing is that urgent cases, particularly children, are able to go out and get the critical medical support that they need. And the reason is, the medical facilities inside the Gaza Strip are at such strain already, massive strain, limited access to medical supplies. We heard from the World Health Organization that cancer hospital is really running out of fuel, almost shutting down. So it's a breaking point essentially inside the Gaza Strip. So any relief, at least for injured civilians, injured children, is welcome.
I see that MSF, Médecins Sans Frontières, has got a few people who left yesterday. Some of their staff working there left yesterday. They're regrouping and getting more people ready to go in if they can get them in. Are you getting the sense that aid workers inside Gaza are wanting to leave?
Well, I mean, UNICEF, and the UN, we have a rotation policy for international staff members, to bring new people in when you can, to fresh up, bring new individuals in to support the humanitarian response. The number one thing really is, as we say, is sort of around staying and delivering, because now the needs are so immense, across the Gaza Strip. to do whatever we can on the ground with our staff in the area to provide that access to life-saving supplies, medical equipment, water particularly, and sanitation, hygiene kits, etc., to get particularly to the shelters that are so densely populated right now.
And do you know anything about how negotiations are going in terms of the discussions about a possible pause to allow the humanitarian aid workers and more aid in? Do you get any insight into that? I mean, obviously, we've heard from President Biden today talking about how there has to be a pause. He was talking about it so that the hostages could be brought out or got out somehow. But do you know how those negotiations are going at all?
Well, I mean, we do advocacy with whoever we can to get a pause, to get a humanitarian ceasefire. That's the number one thing right now, because we also need to scale up the life-saving supplies that can get inside the Gaza Strip. So some aid has been, as we say, trickling in, but it's nowhere near enough. I mean, UN Secretary General said it's completely inadequate. And that's so absolutely vital that we can scale up those numbers of trucks coming in with the life-saving supplies, medical equipment, water, because the issue now is that children are being killed, injured every day, but also there's the threats of outbreaks of diseases and other issues arising. Staff members talk about their children being forced to drink salty water and suffering from dehydration, diarrhea, etc. So it's absolutely urgent now that we scale up that access.
OK, well, thank you very much for talking to us. Toby Fricker there from UNICEF.